Welcome to Beyond Plastic, where science meets consciousness. I'm your host, Dr. Elie, and here we explore the ideas that shape our health, our lives, and ultimately our humanity. In our first series, called The Plastic Age, a journey through the remarkable story of how plastic transformed our world, entered our bodies, and became one of the defining challenges of our time. In our first episode, we went back to the beginning when plastic represented ingenuity, possibility, and progress. Today, we follow that story forward to the moment when this extraordinary new material began its transformation from a modern marvel into something far more consequential. And that is where our story continues in the second episode. The material that nature never made. At the end of our first episode, we arrived at an unsettling realization. Plastic is no longer simply something that surrounds human civilization. It has begun to enter the human body. It has been detected in our blood, our lungs, our reproductive organs, the placenta, and even the developing fetus. In a remarkably short period of time, a material that did not exist in the natural world has become so deeply embedded in our lives that it is now becoming part of our biology. But before we can understand how plastic found its way inside us, we need to step back and ask a more fundamental question. What exactly is plastic? That question may sound simple, but the answer takes us into one of the most extraordinary chapters in the history of human invention. Plastic is not merely a collection of bottles, bags, containers, and packaging. It represents something much more profound. It was the moment humanity learned how to rearrange matter itself, creating materials with properties that nature had never assembled in quite the same way. For most of human history, every material we used came directly from the natural world. We built with stone, wood, clay, and metal. We dressed ourselves in wool, in cotton, leather, and silk. We fashioned tools from bone and horns. We preserved food in glass or ceramic vessels, and depended upon plants and animals for many of the objects that made daily life possible. Nature was both our supplier and our limitation. If we wanted ivory, an elephant had to provide it. If we wanted silk, silkworms had to produce it. If we needed rubber, it had to be extracted from trees growing in particular regions of the world. Materials were constrained by geography, biology, scarcity, and time. Human ingenuity could transform what nature gave us, but it could not yet create an entirely new category of matter. That began to change during the 19th century, when industrialization created an appetite for materials that the natural world could no longer satisfy easily. One of the most frequently told stories from this period begins with something that seems almost trivial: a billiard ball. During the 19th century, the finest billiard balls were made from elephant ivory. As billiards became increasingly popular, the demand for ivory rose with it. Manufacturers needed a material that could reproduce the hardness, the smoothness, and the appearance of ivory without relying upon an animal whose numbers were already under pressure. In response to that challenge, the American inventor John Wesley Hyatt developed a material known as celluloid. Made primarily from cellulose, a natural substance found in plants, celluloid was not yet a completely synthetic plastic. It could catch fire, deform under heat, and was far from perfect. Nevertheless, it represented an enormous conceptual breakthrough. For the first time, human beings had demonstrated that a natural substance could be chemically transformed into a material with an entirely new identity. The significance of that discovery extended far beyond billiard balls. Celluloid could imitate ivory, tortoise shell, horn, and other expensive natural materials. It could be shaped into combs, buttons, photographic film, and countless consumer objects. It offered the possibility that manufactured materials might reduce dependence upon scarce natural resources and make previously expensive goods available to a much larger portion of society. In its earliest form, plastic was therefore connected to a remarkably hopeful idea. It promised abundance without exhaustion. It appeared to offer humanity a way to protect nature by replacing the materials we had traditionally taken from it. The decisive transformation came several decades later. In 1907, the Belgian-born chemist Leo Baekeland introduced Bakelite, widely regarded as the first fully synthetic plastic. Unlike celluloid, Bakelite was not simply a modified natural material. Its chemical structure had been created through an industrial process using substances derived largely from fossil resources. Bakeland had produced a material that nature itself had never made. Bakelite was strong, resistant to heat, and an excellent electrical insulator. It could be molded into complex shapes and then retain that shape with remarkable stability. It soon appeared in telephones, radios, electrical switches, automobile components, jewelry, household goods, and industrial equipment. At the time, this must have felt almost miraculous. Engineers were no longer restricted to the properties of wood, metal, glass, stone, or animal products. Chemists could begin designing materials for particular purposes. They could create something flexible or rigid, transparent or opaque, lightweight or impact resistant. They could adjust a material's properties by altering its molecular structure or adding other chemicals to the mixture. This is the scientific foundation of plastic. Most plastics are composed of very large molecules known as polymers. The word polymer comes from Greek roots meaning many parts. A polymer is essentially a long molecular chain constructed from smaller, repeating units called monomers. You might imagine a necklace made from thousands of chemically connected beads, although the actual molecular structures are far more complex. Nature is filled with polymers. Cellulose, the substance that gives plants much of their strength, is a natural polymer. Proteins are polymers, built from amino acids. DNA itself is a polymer carrying the biological instructions of life. The revolutionary achievement of modern chemistry was not the discovery of polymers as a general concept. Nature had been building them for billions of years. The achievement was learning how to manufacture new polymers on an enormous scale, often using carbon-rich molecules obtained from oil and natural gas. Through heat, pressure, catalysts, and careful controlled chemical reactions, smaller molecules could be connected into long chains. Those chains could then be shaped, stretched, hardened, softened, foamed, or spun into fibers. By changing the building blocks or the way they were connected, chemists could produce materials with dramatically different properties. This is why the word plastic does not describe one single substance. Polyethylene, commonly used in bags, films, and containers, is chemically different from polyvinyl chloride or PVC, which is found in pipes, flooring, medical tubing, and construction materials. Polypropylene appears in food containers, in carpets, automobile parts, and laboratory equipment. Polystyrene can be made into rigid products or expanded into lightweight foam. Polyethylene terephthalate, better known as PET, is widely used in beverage bottles and synthetic clothing fibers. Polycarbonate can be transparent and extremely resistant to impact. These materials belong to the same broad family, but they do not behave in exactly the same way. Each has its own chemical architecture, its own uses, and its own potential consequences. The polymer itself, however, is only part of the story. A finished plastic product often contains numerous additional substances known as additives. These chemicals may be introduced to make the plastic softer, stronger, more flexible, more resistant, less flammable, easier to process, or more visually appealing. Plasticizers can help a rigid polymer's bend. Pigments give it color. Flame retardants reduce its tendency to burn. Ultraviolet stabilizers slow degradation from sunlight. Other compounds may prevent oxidation, reduce static electricity, or alter the surface of the material. This versatility is one of the primary reasons plastic became so successful. It is not simply a material, it is more like a technological platform that can be endlessly modified. A surgeon needs sterile tubing that is soft enough to move through the body. An engineer needs a material that can insulate an electrical wire. A car manufacturer wants components that are strong but lightweight. A food company needs packaging that can prevent moisture and oxygen from reaching its product. Plastic chemistry can be adjusted to meet each of these needs. As a physician, I would never deny the extraordinary benefits that followed. Think about it. Modern medicine depends upon plastic in ways that are difficult to overstate. The blood bags, the syringes, the intravenous tubing, sterile gloves, catheters, pacemakers, artificial joints and valves, protective equipments, medication packaging, and countless diagnostic devices all rely upon polymer science. Plastic has saved lives. It has improved sanitation, reduced the weight of vehicles, has protected food from contamination, and expanded access to consumer goods, helping make modern electronics possible. The purpose of this masterclass is therefore not to create a simplistic story in which plastic is portrayed as an evil invention. That would be intellectually dishonest. The real story is far more complicated and, for that reason, far more important. Plastic succeeded because it solved genuine human problems remarkably well. Its durability prevented products from breaking. Its lightness made transportation easier. Its resistance to water protected food and medical supplies. Its low cost made goods accessible to billions of people. And its ability to be molded into almost any form unleashed enormous creativity in design, in science, medicine, and industry. The very properties that made plastic revolutionary, however, also created the conditions for the crisis we now face. We created a material that could resist decay and then began using it for objects intended to be discarded almost immediately. A polymer chain engineered to remain stable for decades, or potentially much longer, might be transformed into a cup used for less than 20 minutes, a bag used for a single journey home from the store, or a wrapper opened and thrown away within seconds. There is almost a tragic contradiction at the center of that design. We used one of the most durable materials ever created to build a culture of disposability. In nature, materials generally participate in cycles. For example, a leaf falls, decomposes, and returns its nutrients to the soil. An animal dies and its body becomes part of the biological system that once sustained it. Even remarkably durable natural substances are eventually broken down by organisms and environmental processes that evolved alongside them. Most synthetic plastics entered the world without such a biological relationship. Microorganisms have not evolved specifically to digest these new molecular structures at anything approaching the rate at which humans were producing them. Plastic could weather, crack, fade, and break apart. But breaking apart is not the same as returning safely to nature. This distinction is essential. When a piece of plastic disappears from our sight, from our view, it has not necessarily disappeared from the environment. Sunlight, heat, waves, friction, and physical stress can gradually fragment a larger object into smaller pieces. Those fragments may then break into even smaller particles. The object becomes less visible, but the material remains. The bottle does not simply vanish. It becomes thousands, perhaps millions of smaller pieces. Those smaller fragments are what we call microplastics, generally defined as plastic particles smaller than 5 millimeters. As the fragmentation continues, some particles become microscopic and eventually they may reach the nanoscale, small enough to interact with cells, with tissues, and biological barriers in ways that larger pieces cannot. This is where the remarkable chemistry of plastic begins to intersect with the chemistry of life. The polymer chains themselves may persist, while additives can migrate from the material over time. Plastic particles can also acquire other substances from the environment and carry complex mixtures on their surfaces. Their behavior depends upon their size, shape, composition, age, and the conditions to which they have been exposed. A transparent bottle resting on a store shelf may appear inert and uncomplicated. At the molecular level, however, it represents an engineered structure with a long history, beginning with fossil carbon extracted from the earth, transformed through industrial chemistry, combined with additional compounds, molded into a product, and eventually released to a world that has no easy way to absorb it. Once you understand this, plastic begins to look different. A disposable container is no longer merely a convenient object. It is a piece of molecular architecture, the end product of millions of years of geological history and a little more than a century of human chemistry. It was created with enough stability to resist the natural processes that break other materials down. yet it may have been designed to serve us only once. That is the central paradox of plastic. It is useful because it lasts, and it has become dangerous in part because it lasts. It is adaptable enough to enter almost every industry, and therefore pervasive enough to enter almost every environment. It is inexpensive at the moment we purchase it, while many of its true costs are transferred into the future, into ecosystems, communities, and increasingly into the human body. Plastic did not invade our world by force. We invited it in because it was brilliant, it was practical, and extraordinarily useful. We placed it in our kitchens, our hospitals, our clothing, our cars, our homes, and our children's hands. We wrapped our food in it, drank from it, wore it against our skin, and built much of modern civilization upon it. The problem is that we adopted this material far more quickly than we learned how to live responsibly with it. We mastered the science of making plastic, but not the wisdom of what should happen after we were finished using it. And that brings us to the next part of our investigation. If plastic does not truly disappear, where does it go? How does a bottle become a microscopic particle? How do synthetic fibers leave our clothing and enter the air we breathe? How does plastic travel through oceans, soil, food, water, and eventually into the human body? In the next episode, we will follow that journey. We will watch plastic move from the objects we can see into a hidden world of particles we cannot. And we will begin to understand how a material created outside of nature found a pathway into the most intimate regions of human life. If this episode changed the way you see the world, share it with someone you care about. Awareness is where transformation begins. And until next time, thank you for listening.